In casinos, the house always wins, right? Well, that's not entirely true, because throughout history, a handful of people didn't just beat the odds, they broke the game, and they didn't rely on luck. These weren't reckless gamblers making desperate plays, they were masterminds, nerds with hidden computers, con artists who turned slot machines into personal ATMs, and teams so coordinated that casinos never saw them coming. Their stories aren't just about winning, they're about getting away with it, until they didn't. Each of these stories will make you question just how secure casinos really are. But before you assume you've heard it all, think again, because the way these scams worked, the way they fell apart, and what happened next, is nothing like you'd expect. Let's start with a man who cheated Las Vegas for over 2 decades, making small, careful adjustments to slot machines in plain sight. The casinos knew something was wrong, they just couldn't figure out how, until one mistake changed everything. Dennis McAndrew wasn't the kind of guy you'd look twice at. No expensive suits, no flashy jewelry, no high-stakes persona that screamed Vegas hustler. But behind the unremarkable face was a mind that saw slot machines for what they really were, puzzles waiting to be solved. His journey into deception didn't start in the neon glow of the Las Vegas Strip. It started with a set of lockpicks and the wrong kind of friends. In the late 1960s, McAndrew found himself entangled with the Genovese crime family, a group that didn't exactly deal in second chances. His talent, breaking into things that weren't meant to be opened, cars, homes, jewelry stores. But when the police caught up with him, he faced a choice. Give up names and buy himself a very short and unpleasant retirement, or keep quiet and earn the respect of people who could make his life significantly worse. He chose silence. After nearly a decade behind bars, McAndrew emerged with a new name, Dennis Nick Rash. A fresh start, but not in the way most people mean it. He wasn't interested in redemption, he was interested in opportunity, and there was one place where money moved faster than anywhere else, Las Vegas. The first time he sat in front of a slot machine, he wasn't playing, he was studying. He watched people drop coins, pull levers and lose over and over again, but he wasn't looking at the players, he was looking at the machines. He wanted to know how they were secured, how they triggered payouts, and most importantly, how they could be beaten. Back then, slot machines were mechanical, simple circuits, spinning reels, and jackpots determined by the alignment of gears. If someone could get inside undetected, they could make the reel stop wherever they wanted. The problem was security alarms. The machines were designed to trigger an alert if the casing was tampered with, but casinos had a flaw. When staff needed to service a machine, they had to disable the alarm within a few seconds of opening it. Nick Rush found the hidden switch that allowed them to do this. In a small Vegas apartment, he bought an old slot machine and practiced, over and over again, sliding a thin piece of metal through the casing, triggering the switch, adjusting the reels, and closing the machine, all in under 15 seconds. When he was ready, he hit the casinos. The technique was perfect. The machines showed no signs of tampering. He could win any time he wanted, and security had no idea how. For nearly a decade, he bled casinos dry. He never got greedy, never hit the same place too often, never took more than he could get away with. But then came the mistake. In 1986, at a quiet corner of a Vegas casino, Nick Rash cracked open a machine, deactivated the alarm, and set up the jackpot. But he wasn't alone. A new security guard, eager to impress, was watching. He didn't know what he was seeing, just a man playing a slot machine, but something felt off. Maybe it was the mechanical precision, maybe it was how quickly the wind came after the door closed. Either way, he followed Nick Rush as he walked away. Moments later, security tackled him to the floor. Nick Rush was sentenced to 5 years, but he wasn't done. He had time to think, time to realize that slot machines were evolving. Mechanical reels were being replaced with digital screens. Jackpots weren't triggered by gears. They were controlled by microprocessors and software. By the time he got out, Vegas had changed. So had he. Nick Rush understood locks, but this wasn't about locks anymore. It was about code. He needed help. Eugene Bino was an expert in computer programming and, more importantly, had no criminal record, the perfect partner. Together they acquired 2 digital slot machines and cracked their software. The breakthrough? A device that could be attached to the machine's motherboard, temporarily corrupting the system so it would keep hitting the jackpot, then erasing all traces of interference. The scam worked like a dream, but there was a new problem: cash outs. The new machines printed winning tickets that had to be redeemed at the cashier, making it impossible for one man to win repeatedly without drawing attention. So they formed a team. Nick Rash recruited 9 accomplices. Each person had a role. Some distracted security, others played the rigged machines, and one woman cashed out the tickets. They never entered a casino together, never left together, never stayed too long. For 8 months, they hit Vegas casinos systematically. The Luxor, the Rio, the MGM, all of them bled money without realizing why. By 1997, they had taken close to $16 million, but Nikrish wasn't satisfied. The biggest jackpot in Vegas, the Megabucks, was sitting at $17 million. He wanted it. And then, the one thing he never accounted for happened. Loyalty broke. One of his low-level blockers got caught up in an unrelated crime. The FBI offered them a deal. Give up something bigger and they'd go free. They didn't hesitate. On a summer morning in 1998, FBI agents kicked down Nikrash's door. They found 2 slot machines, locksmith tools, antique furniture worth hundreds of thousands, and a handheld computer that had cheated Vegas for over 20 years. The prosecution offered him a lighter sentence in exchange for information on other casino cheats. He refused. He served his full sentence and was released in 2000, only to pass away a decade later. He was one of the greatest slot cheats in history, but in the end, his downfall came from the same thing that had kept him in the game for so long: trusting the wrong people. Speaking of people who thought they could beat the house, let's talk about a scam so bold it didn't just target a single casino, it broke the game of roulette itself. Deauville, France, 1973. Beneath the golden chandeliers of one of Europe's most prestigious casinos, the wheels of fortune are spinning as they always have. Rich men sip champagne. Aristocrats toss away small fortunes like it's pocket change. And at the heart of it all, a woman stands with her back to the roulette table, barely able to steady her breathing. She's not a gambler. Not in the way the casino thinks anyway. She's the architect of $1 million scam. Was it worth it though? Monique Laurent wasn't born into this world of effortless wealth. She grew up on the outskirts of it, close enough to see the privilege, far enough to know she'd never be invited in. She wasn't the kind of person the casino expected to be dangerous. Beautiful, yes. Charming, of course. But a threat? Not in their eyes. That was their first mistake. Monique had something far more valuable than a seat at a high-stakes table. She had access. Her brother was a croupier, a man who understood the mechanics of the game better than the gamblers who played it. And Monique, she understood people. She knew how to make them underestimate her. She knew how to make them trust her. And when she and her brother put their heads together, they saw something no one else did. Roulette wasn't as random as it seemed. The game's biggest illusion is that it's entirely left to chance. A ball spins, bounces unpredictably, and lands wherever fate decides. But what if fate could be nudged in the right direction? What if someone knew exactly when and where to interfere? It started with an idea. Her brother was a technical guy, a hobbyist who spent hours tinkering with radios and transmitters. He wasn't a gambler, but he knew how signals worked, and in the hands of the right person, a well-timed signal could change everything. They built their system in secret. A standard roulette ball was modified with a tiny vibrating receiver, light enough to avoid suspicion, subtle enough to go unnoticed. The transmitter was hidden inside Monique's cigarette pack. And the trigger? A simple button, pressed at just the right moment, sending a tiny impulse to the ball, shifting its trajectory by just enough to land in one of 6 predetermined pockets. Not an exact science, but precise enough to turn the odds dramatically in their favor. But the real genius wasn't the technology, it was the execution. They needed a team. Monique's husband would be the frontman, the one placing the bets, playing the role of an uninspired gambler on a hot streak. Her brother, as a croupier, would be in the perfect position to ensure the right ball was in play. And Monique? She'd be the ghost in the machine, sending the signal from across the room, perfectly out of reach. The first night was cautious. Small bets, modest wins, the casino didn't suspect a thing. On the second night, they scaled up. A little more confidence, a little more risk. By night 3, they were pushing $10,000 per spin, and the money was piling up. But they weren't the only ones paying attention. Roulette is one of the steadiest earners for a casino. Unlike poker, where pros can exploit weaker players, or blackjack, where counting cards gives an edge, roulette should always be a slow grind in favor of the house. So when the numbers started looking off, management noticed, but they couldn't see the trick. The wheel was fine, the dealer wasn't new, the bets were bold but not impossible. Maybe, they thought, they were just witnessing one of those rare statistical anomalies. And then came the ego. The casino manager, fascinated by Monique, kept a close eye on her. At first it was admiration, then curiosity, and then suspicion. Day 6. The team had pushed past $500,000, and Monique could feel the walls closing in. The pit bosses lingered too long. The eyes in the sky followed her husband's every move. The manager watched her, not at the table, but when she lit a cigarette. That was the detail that gave her away. She never smoked, not once. And yet, every time her husband won big, the cigarette pack was in her hand. On the 7th and final night, the team was closing in on $1 million score. Monique knew they were being watched. She just didn't know how much time they had left. And then, just as they reached their goal, the manager approached, smiling, polite, but direct. "Madame, may I have one of your cigarettes?" Checkmate. The security team was on her before she could even react. The cigarette pack was confiscated, the transmitter inside exposed, and the game was over. The courts weren't kind. Monique and her team were convicted, banned from every major casino in Europe, and sent to prison. But as she walked out years later, she wasn't done. The lights of Deauville were behind her. Las Vegas was ahead. Of course, the house learned its lesson. Roulette balls are now inspected, weight-checked, and monitored for tampering. But the irony? While Monique's trick was outlawed, the idea of manipulating the ball's movement wasn't. There are still whispers that some casinos, under the right circumstances, do it themselves. Speaking of people who blurred the lines between genius and crime, let's talk about a man who didn't just cheat the casino. He did it without ever being seen. The perfect casino cheat is the one you never see coming. No fake chips, no suspicious betting patterns, no team of lookouts watching for security. Just a regular player who sits down, plays the game, and walks away with a fortune, while the casino never figures out what went wrong. Daryl Purpose was exactly that. When the police arrived at the casino in Leicester, England, the staff didn't have a crime scene to show them. No stolen chips, no counterfeit money. Just an American gambler walking out the door with £10,000, and not a single person could explain how he won it. There was one strange detail. Every time he played, the dealer noticed a faint buzzing sound. At first, no one thought much of it, but when they added up his winnings, security started asking questions. The thing was, Daryl wasn't new to this. He had spent years winning in casinos without being caught, and he had learned the most important rule of all. If they don't know how you're beating them, they can't stop you. But before the police showed up, before his name was whispered in backrooms, he had been just another kid with a talent for math and a willingness to push the limits. At 16, he ran away from home with $50 to his name. By his early 20s, he had joined one of the most secretive blackjack teams in America. He was a natural card counter, passing the initiation test faster than anyone the team had ever seen. Counting cards was one thing, doing it under pressure while keeping a straight face was another. Blackjack was a goldmine, but it came with a problem: surveillance. Vegas wasn't run by clueless tourists throwing money at the tables. It was run by men in back rooms, watching for anyone smart enough to turn the odds against the house. Purpose had already seen what happened when a card counter got caught. His team's leader, Ken Houston, had been grabbed by casino security and dragged into a back alley. 19 broken bones later, he was done with the game. That left Purpose with a choice: keep playing and wait for the same thing to happen to him, or find a way to disappear. That's when he and his friend Craig, a shoemaker, built something the casinos had never seen before. A hidden electronic device, not in his pocket, not in his sleeve, but inside his shoe. A circuit board no bigger than a deck of cards, wired to 2 miniature switches under his toes. It worked like this: tap up to add a card to the count, tap down to subtract. If the count was in his favor, the shoe buzzed. 1 short buzz for a good count, 2 for a bad one. The beauty of it: no human error, no suspicious signals, no way for casino security to see what was happening. But perfect in theory meant nothing if it couldn't be used in a real casino. Vegas was too dangerous for a test run. They needed a place where blackjack surveillance was weak: England. Casinos there weren't used to professional card counters. Perfect. And at first, it worked flawlessly. The shoe tracked the count. Purpose placed his bets accordingly, and within hours, he was up £10,000. Easy money. And then came the problem. Unlike Vegas, British casinos didn't keep large amounts of cash on hand. Instead of walking out with his winnings, he was given a check and told to come back the next day if he wanted cash. That delay changed everything. By the time he returned, security had started asking questions. His bets had been too precise, his strategy too perfect. And then the dealer mentioned something strange: that buzzing sound. Casino managers didn't know what it meant, but they knew they didn't like it. They called the police. When Purpose saw them walking toward him, he stayed calm. He had no fake IDs, no devices in his pockets, no earpiece. As far as anyone could tell, he was just a lucky gambler. But then came the real danger. The police decided to search his hotel room. Sitting inside a briefcase, hidden among everyday items, was everything. spare wires, extra switches, backup batteries, and casino membership cards from London, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. If the police knew what they were looking at, he was finished. And then, the luck that had made him a fortune saved him again. One of the officers opened a briefcase, looked at the tangle of wires and circuits, frowned, and closed it without saying a word. They had no idea what they had just held in their hands. Purpose walked free. The casino had no evidence of cheating, and the police had nothing to charge him with. The next day, he collected his £10,000 in cash and walked out the door. But he knew the shoe device's time was up. The buzzing had almost gotten him caught. Casinos weren't stupid. It was only a matter of time before they started searching shoes. So he adapted. He changed his hair color, facial hair, even had a mole removed. Anything to stay ahead of the game. But casinos adapted too. Shuffling procedures changed, surveillance improved, the house always learns. Purpose still made his fortune. He even landed a spot in the Blackjack Hall of Fame.
My name is Daryl Purpose. I'm in the Blackjack Hall of Fame. I've been asked to leave casinos on 6 continents.
But that device, that died the moment it almost got exposed. Some cheaters needed electronics, others needed inside information, and then there were the ones who didn't need technology at all, just a scientific understanding of the laws of physics. Because if you think blackjack is beatable, wait until you hear how 2 college students rewrote the rules of roulette. The year is 1978, and 2 young men wearing white shirts walk into a Las Vegas casino. Just 2 unassuming physics students with an idea that, if correct, would turn the world's most random casino game into a predictable formula. They were scientists, and they saw something no one else did. Roulette was just physics disguised as chaos. Meet Doyne Farmer and Norman Packard, 2 physics students at the University of California. They weren't interested in gambling. They were interested in solving problems. And roulette? That was a problem that, in theory, had a solution. Their logic was simple. The inputs of roulette are fixed, which means the outcome isn't truly random. If you could measure the ball's speed, the wheel's rotation, and the forces at play, you could, at least in theory, predict where the ball would land. But theory wasn't enough. They needed proof. So they built a plan. Step 1 was data collection. The duo visited casinos, armed with nothing but a dictaphone hidden in their sleeves. Every time the wheel made a full rotation, they tapped a button on the recording device. They did the same for the ball. It looked innocent, just a nervous tick, a gambler fidgeting at the table. But those taps, they were creating a data set, a log of how wheels spun, how balls slowed down, and, most importantly, how the physical forces affected the final landing spot. Step 2 was then analysis. Back in their dorm, they studied the numbers. Patterns began to emerge. The wheel wasn't as unpredictable as people thought. Certain wheels had subtle imperfections, tiny biases that caused the ball to favor specific areas. But even beyond that, they found something bigger. If you measured the ball's speed early enough, you could predict which section of the wheel it would land in. Not the exact number every time, but a narrow range. And in roulette, that's all you need. Step 3. Building the machine. To predict roulette in real time, they needed something small enough to be hidden yet powerful enough to run calculations in seconds. This was 1978. Computers weren't exactly pocket-sized, but they built one anyway. They called it the guillotine, a rudimentary wearable computer that could process roulette physics faster than any human could calculate. The setup was genius. A main circuit board strapped to the chest, thin wires running down the legs, a hidden switch taped inside their shoe, a tiny electromagnetic buzzer pressed against the skin. The system worked like this. The player tracked the wheel and ball speed using subtle taps on the switch inside their shoe. The hidden computer ran calculations in real time. A few seconds before the dealer released the ball, the player received a coded signal via the buzzer, telling them where to bet. They didn't need to know the exact number. The system simply narrowed it down to a 5-number section. That alone was a 7-fold improvement over random chance. If their math was right, they had a 20% edge over the house. That's bigger than any card counting advantage, bigger than any poker exploit. This wasn't just beating the casino, this was rewriting the game itself. It was time for the final step, going live. A cold winter afternoon in 1977, Farmer walks into a casino. He picks a roulette table, sits down, and places a few small bets. Just another low-stakes gambler looking to get lucky. He starts the process. A tap to track the wheel's movement, another tap to track the ball's speed. The computer hums beneath his shirt, calculating. And then, buzz. A slight shock against his chest, telling him where to bet. He follows the signal, places his chips, watches. The ball lands right in the predicted section. It's working. He repeats the process again and again, slowly increasing his bets. The chips start stacking up, and then he notices something he hadn't accounted for: sweat. The casino is warm. The hidden computer is strapped to his chest. The combination is amplifying the electric shocks. Every time the device buzzes, the jolt feels stronger. It's getting harder to focus. And then he spots something even worse: a casino pit boss watching him. The paranoia kicks in. He knows he hasn't done anything visibly suspicious. His bets aren't absurd. He hasn't won too much too quickly. But in Vegas, casino security doesn't need a reason to pull someone aside. He forces himself to act casual, cashes out, walks to the restroom. Inside a bathroom stall, he rips off the electromagnetic pad from his chest. The shocks stop, his mind clears, but the radio on the pit boss's belt is still ringing in his ears. He doesn't even try to play again. He heads straight for the cashier, collects his winnings, and walks out. He's won, but it's clear the strategy needs work, so they scale up. They recruit 20 physics students, form a secret group, and prepare for an all-out Vegas assault. They fine-tune the computer, train new players, and strategize how to hit multiple casinos without getting caught. The summer of 1978 is supposed to be their big breakthrough, but that's when it all falls apart. Their plan is simple: spread out, hit different casinos, keep the bets small enough to avoid suspicion, but big enough to make a fortune. At first, it works. The teams collect data, place calculated bets, and watch the winnings roll in. Within hours, they're up $10,000. But then the problems start. One team member sweats so much that the electromagnetic pad burns her skin. Another team's wires get tangled, and the signals stop working mid-session. A casino pit boss grows suspicious of a lucky player who keeps hitting the right sections. After a single night, the team regroups. Tension is high. Some want to go bigger, push the limits. Others think it's too risky. The malfunctions, the paranoia, the close calls, it's adding up. And then, the decision. They could double down, refine the strategy, and take their shot at making millions. Or they could walk away while they were still ahead. They choose the latter. The group dissolves, the computers are packed away. The dream of beating Roulette forever dies. Years later, Farmer would break his silence on how it all worked. He never wanted to help casinos fix the game. He wanted players to know it was possible. And he proved something that casinos never wanted to admit. Roulette wasn't random, it never was. But as dangerous as math and physics were to the casino industry, the next person who took on the house didn't need equations or technology. He had something even more powerful: a job on the inside.
He's the most notorious cheat of all time.
Basically, he turned the gaff machines into his own personal ATMs.
The perfect scam doesn't need brute force. It doesn't need sleight of hand. It doesn't even need an elaborate team. The perfect scam happens when the person in charge of stopping the cheaters becomes the biggest cheat of them all. For 6 years, Ron Harris was that guy. His job at the Nevada Gaming Control Board wasn't glamorous, but it came with power. He was the man who inspected slot machines, verified their software, and made sure no one could manipulate the system. If a casino needed to confirm their machines were fair, Harris was the guy they called. And for a while, he played by the rules, until he realized something. The biggest weakness in casino security wasn't a hole in their surveillance. It wasn't a faulty slot machine, it was trust. In 1989, Harris was assigned to investigate a cheating scandal involving American Coin Enterprises, a company supplying video poker machines across Vegas. The scam was a hidden piece of code that prevented max bet players from ever hitting a royal flush. The casinos had no idea. The players had no idea. Harris found the fraud, exposed it, and the company collapsed. Case closed. But in the process, something clicked. If this company had stolen $17 million and no one noticed, how hard would it really be to do it himself? So he flipped the script. Instead of protecting the system, he exploited it. First, he built himself an undetectable cheat code, a hidden command inside certain slot machines that would trigger a jackpot if coins were inserted in a specific sequence. The kicker? Once it paid out, the cheat code erased itself. No physical tampering, no trail. Just a lucky winner walking away from a perfectly normal machine. Harris, of course, couldn't claim the winnings himself. That's where Reed McNeil came in, his frontman, a nobody with no connections to the gaming control board. McNeil played the machines, hit the jackpot, cashed out, and disappeared. The perfect accomplice. For 3 years, they ran the scam without a hitch. Casinos assumed the wins were pure chance. The Nevada Gaming Commission never suspected a thing. Harris and McNeil moved carefully, never getting too greedy, never hitting the same casino twice. But Harris had bigger ambitions. If he could beat slots, why not Keno? Unlike slot machines, Keno wasn't a game of timing or sequences, it was a lottery-style draw. Players picked numbers, and if they matched the winning set, they hit the jackpot. The odds of getting all 8 numbers? 1 in 230,000, impossible to predict. Unless you had access to the software running the game, Harris did. He spent months analyzing Keno number generators, and that's when he made a breakthrough. The so-called random numbers weren't actually random. The algorithm had a pattern, and if you knew the variables, you could predict the next draw. This wasn't cheating in the traditional sense. He didn't alter the results. He just knew what was coming before anyone else did. So McNeil was sent to Atlantic City. This time, there was no need for hidden codes or rigged machines. All McNeil had to do was wait for Harris to feed him the winning numbers through an earpiece hidden in his hearing aid. The first attempt? Off by a few numbers. The second? Perfect match. $100,000, just like that. And then McNeil made the single mistake that ruined everything. When casino staff asked him how he wanted his payout, he casually gave them his hotel room number. That was all it took. Security had already been suspicious. A first-time Keno player hitting a perfect 8-number match was rare enough. But when they ran his name, they found something even more interesting. He had been on multiple lucky streaks across the country. Suddenly, they weren't just suspicious, they were convinced. McNeil was quietly pulled aside by casino investigators. They didn't arrest him, they didn't accuse him of cheating, they just asked questions. Who are you? Where are you from? How did you pick those numbers? And McNeil, he wasn't prepared. He fumbled his answers. He got defensive. He didn't have a clean, rehearsed story to fall back on. Upstairs, Harris knew something was wrong. He grabbed his equipment, stuffed it into his bag, and ran for the airport. It didn't matter. By the time he landed in Vegas, the Nevada Gaming Commission and the police were waiting for him. The investigation unraveled everything. The slot machine cheat codes, the erased jackpot triggers, the Keno fraud. Harris was sentenced to 7 years in prison. For the casinos, it wasn't just another cheater getting caught. It was a betrayal of the system. This was the man who was supposed to stop fraud. The man who designed the security measures to catch people like himself. And he had exposed the biggest flaw in gambling, the illusion of randomness. Harris proved something the industry never wanted to admit, that even in a world designed to keep players losing, someone smart enough could turn the system against itself. His case changed the way slot machines were tested, how Keno draws were monitored, how insider access was controlled. But it left one question that casinos still don't like answering. If Ron Harris could do it, who else already has? Casinos have always claimed that the house never loses, but time and time again, people have found ways to break the system. Some with science, some with technology, and some by simply knowing how to exploit the flaws no one else could see. But slot machines and roulette wheels are just one side of the equation, because while these scams relied on hidden devices and software tricks, there's another game where cheating happens right in front of everyone, and sometimes even the best players in the world don't see it coming. Welcome to the world of poker cheats, where deception, collusion, and outright fraud have shaped the history of the game itself. And trust me, those stories, they make these casino scams look tame.